Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Doug Chipman, Mayor of the City of Clarence, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to tonight's council meeting. Would those present in the room please join me in the council prayer and stand, please. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vow safe Thy blessing upon this council. Direct and prosperous deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the City of Clarence. Amen. I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight, and pay our respects to elders past and present. Thank you. I'm also delighted to welcome 4 members of the public to our council meeting tonight. With the COVID restrictions having been relaxed to the point where aldermen are able to resume their normal seats, we are able to take up to 12 members of the public, but they need to make a prior booking before they're able to be admitted. Nevertheless, we will continue to broadcast our meetings live on YouTube. The link and the agenda papers are available on the council's website, and I do need to remind all present here that what is said at this meeting is not protected by privilege. I note we have all aldermen in attendance, so there are no apologies. Could I ask if there are any declarations of interest of aldermen or close associates? Thank you. I'd now like to deal with the starred items in the agenda first as an omnibus motion. First of all, the confirmation of the minutes for the 31st of May, and there are 2 special meetings held on the night of the 7th of June as well. That the minutes of those 3 meetings as circulated be taken as read and confirmed. Are there any questions on those? Thank you. Mayor's communication. I'd like to table the reports that we've of different interviews and meetings that I've had, and also the representation of the Deputy Mayor and other aldermen.
You wish to start that one?
Me?
You wish to start that one?
Look, I'm including that as something that's covered at this stage. I'm happy to take any. It doesn't require a motion normally. Thanks, Alderman Walker. You're right. Item 4, Council notes the workshops conducted on the 7th and 15th of January and the agenda briefing on the 18th of January. June, that is, not January.
Close.
Tabling of petitions. Are there any, General Manager?
There are no petitions, Mayor.
Any from the floor? Thank you. Public question time with no matters on notice. Do you have any questions without notice?
No, Mayor.
Thank you. And deputations by members of the public?
No deputations on
There are no motions on notice. Moving to reports from outside bodies, I note that there are no quarterly reports due. Alderman Walker, did you need to comment on the copying? No. And certainly I have no comment in regard to Tadwater or Greater Hobart. Are there any reports from council or special committees or other representative bodies? Alderman John?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have electronically tabled the minutes of the Richmond Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Thank you. And reports of officers. We've got the information that's in the weekly briefing reports of the 31st of May, 7th and 14th of June be noted. And
discussion on that at this stage?
Certainly, no. Alderman James, if you've got any questions in regard to the weekly briefing reports.
Yeah, look, I do. Thank you. The weekly briefing report of the 7th of June 2021 in relation to works to remove and replant pine trees in Pipe Plays, Esplanade foreshore in Cremorne. I note in the attachment that considerable work will be undertaken. It's been based on community input in relation to the rehabilitation of native vegetation through you to Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, there has been some discussion about roadworks, in fact, along Pipe Clay, Pipe Clay Esplanade. Is there any intention to do any roadworks in conjunction with the tree removal, which has been identified in your memorandum that has been dispatched to residents in the vicinity of Pipe Clay Esplanade?
Through you, Mr Mayor, this work in the briefing report is purely just removal of the tree. There is no planned roadworks associated with this work.
Thank you.
Another matter that I'd like to raise is in relation to the 14th of June 2021, and it's in relation to the current infringement enforcement notice, which is on the last page of the briefing report. And my question through you to Mr. Lovell, in his capacity as city planner. Mr. Lovell, Southern Bay Investments at 2 Dumbarton Drive in Gillespie Bay has been on the boil in that sense for a number of months now, and it doesn't appear that there's been any change in relation to the action, that namely infringement notice issued matter currently with the external lawyer. Is Mr. Lovell able to advise council of the current situation in relation to this matter?
Mr. Lovell?
Yes, I can. This is a matter that concerned the issue. Waiting on a written decision, however, understand it's imminent. So we'll be able to do a briefing report to inform the council.
Discussion and clarified internally, so that shouldn't happen anymore.
Thank you. Thank you all for commenting. Any other points on the weekly briefing reports? In that case, I'll call for a movement and a second to pull the start items that require a motion. Thank you, Alderman Pearce, second to Alderman Kennedy. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you.
Corrections there, I would say.
I will.
Point of explanations there. We took with an omnibus motion. One of the motions relates to the document which I was not present, so I'm not.
Thank you for that explanation, Alderman Motto. Moving on to item 11.2, examination of petition to 11.2.1 for the sign at 22 Bridge Street, Richmond for the Museum. Thank you, Alderman Evans. Second, thank you, Alderman Kennedy. You wish to speak to it?
Not unless someone else does.
Alderman Kennedy.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Any other speakers? In that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Now advise that Council intends to sue the planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. Moving on to the first item there, 11.3.1, development application of 2A Collins Street, Richmond, for
for approval subject to conditions and advice. Thanks, Alderman Walker. Reason was first off the rank. Would you like to speak to it?
I'll see how we go.
Alderman Ewington? Any other speakers on this motion? Okay, so I'll put the motion which is for approval. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.2 is a development application at 38 and 38A Buckingham Drive for a 30-lot subdivision. Moved Alderman Walker, seconded Alderman Ewington. Would you like to speak to it, Alderman Walker?
Look, I'm surprised people didn't jump out of their seats to support this motion. This is something that's been through the planning process, as they all do. It's recommended for approval, as they often are. But again, the positive spillover of more blocks, so more houses can be coming along, is great news, and something that I think this council has been pretty supportive of. So I enthusiastically encourage my colleagues to support item 11.3.2.
Thank you. Alderman Ewington, do you wish to speak? Other speakers? Alderman James?
Yes, thank you. I do note that on the summary document on the last page of this submission, that on page 56 it says, and this is reported, the officer's comments in relation to a public open space does not provide a community benefit comment and other matters. It says, as discussed, the existing zoning of the adjoining land and the location of the building on this site restricts the potential to provide for a vehicle connection. However, the lack of a road connection is considered to be an offset by the pedestrian slash bicycle link through the site, which will link to the adjoining property at 30 Holland. It just seems to me that this sacrifice, if you want to call it that, of a road connection, which by the very nature of providing access for vehicular traffic, and being basically superseded, if you want to call it that, by a pedestrian bicycle link. It just seems to me that this doesn't really lend itself to a traffic flow which would in fact complement the development, and by the very nature of basically not allowing, or in this case not providing for a road link, it just seems to me that it's not really appropriate, and it has been raised as one of the representatives' comments in relation to that. The other matter is in relation to the on page 47, and it refers to the future subdivision of any neighbouring or nearby land with subdivision potential is facilitated through the provision of a connector roads and pedestrian paths where appropriate to a common boundary. So again, in this particular proposal, it is saying that and it seems as though it's contrary to that particular acceptable solution, that it's more appropriate for a pedestrian pathway and not necessarily connector roads to this subdivision because of the very nature of the land being subdivided and as being cul-de-sacs, is to essentially swap the access to the public open space. It just seems as though this development, if we again look at the plan that's been attached, that there is on attachment 3, I think it is, you've got this massive of development in particular stagings, and this one is in fact 30 lot development, and it just seems as though that there is a predominance of development into smaller lots, which will, by the very nature of the total development, I believe, is not really sustainable development in an area where, alongside of it, or where the actual church and other open space is, that it's just providing a total infill, which I think is contrary to sustainable development.
Thank you, Alderman Jones. Other speakers? Will I reply, Alderman Walker?
Thank you. We are not allowed to predetermine our position, as we all know, when we have planning items come before us, and that is why I've listened with an open mind to what Alderman James had to say, Your Worship. I didn't find it entirely persuasive, probably not even partially persuasive. This is and you could call this an infill area, but it's a completely logical area, well serviced. It's going to be straightforward as far as rubbish removal and all those things go. This is probably one of the easier things that come across a planner's desk, I would suggest. So again, it's not zoned in a residential, so they're not going to be tiny lots. They're going to be well within the minimum threshold that's as of right allowed, and I think they're going to be probably greatly appreciated. Not that that's a planning matter, but on planning grounds, if nothing else, this stacks up. And again, seek Alderman support.
Thank you, Alderman Walker. So the recommendation is for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to 11.3.3, it's a development application at 3 Yachtsman's Way, Tranmere, for 2 multiple dwellings. Thank you, Alderman Newington. Do I have a seconder, please? Alderman Pearce. Alderman Newington.
Pretty straightforward, this one, once again, I think. You had when you said the representations against it, they're quite rationally arguing that it's been not relevant in this situation. I think the thing that we've all got to come to terms with this issue about some of the apartments and smaller dwellings is that not everyone wants to live in a big house on a big block with 3 bedrooms and 2 garages and the whole space to go with it. And having a bit better choices out there in terms of the types of dwellings that people can choose from, I think is a really important thing that needs to occur in our city. And I think this development represents a really good example of high quality architecture, something to be well received by potential purchasers out there. And I think that it's ticked all the boxes, and we should be supportive of this sort of thing happening. So I would encourage my colleagues to support this development.
Thank you, Alderman Pearce.
Very quick, Mayor. We seem to always get a lot of objections when anything's done in the Yachtsman's Way, and I'm not quite sure why. I drove up there to have a look, see if I'd missed something, and really I think it's quite ample. I'm just not quite sure of why some of these objections. I don't find them valid, to be perfect. I was looking at the site. I think it's ideal for 2 buildings.
Thank you. Other speakers? Mulder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'll be supporting this one because we've had our go at trying to do something about this, and we've fallen over. Just a couple of observations. To suggest that the representations are relevant is correct only in the sense that they're not relevant to the planning matters. People have a right to express an opinion, and the officers, of course, have a right to say, well, that's an opinion, but it's not a planning matter. And as such, that is the thing. But to dismiss them as not being relevant is a little wrong, and I think it needs to be taken as not having planning relevance. The idea that somehow or other these blocks, we've got to approve multiple dwellings because not everyone wants to live in a 3-bedroom house and a 3-bedroom block and 3 garages and all those sorts of things. That's not the point. The point with a lot of these development, and I agree with them, but it's not a planning matter, is the fact that the lot sizes are becoming either so small that you can only fit a unit on them and no backyard, or they're becoming big so that you can put 2 units on them and once again no backyard. So the issue here is not, of course, a planning matter. It's one that we've tried to get through, and the powers that be have determined that it's the interests of land is that they're not be 3/4 acre blocks or half-acre blocks, but that the backyards are not. Now that is a valid position for the community to take. Unfortunately, we have tried to suggest that that because not everyone wants a big backyard, it's suddenly we're now going to in these developments we're getting to the point where there is no room for a big backyard, and we're all going to be stuck with small things. observation as a matter of principle. When a pandemic such as COVID-19 strikes, it is most severe in places where people are packed together. And in fact, it's apartment buildings and these high density areas where it has its most rapid spread and is the most difficult to contain. So from a public policy perspective, we need to start thinking about, do we need to spread out just for health reasons? But I will be supporting this motion, but I just rise to say that these issues aren't clear cut and you can't just put people's valid concerns and throw them away without at least addressing.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, a reply. Alderman Ewing.
Only just quickly, I just want to talk about Marvel's comment there. The only thing I'd say, if we are going to get more infill housing, I think it's more important we look at some of the public amenities in parks and recreation spaces that we create. And hopefully we can do that with a higher density housing. And I think after spending the last 3 weeks travelling around some nice beachfront areas up and down Australia, I know we can do a hell of a lot better in our city, and I'd like to hopefully look forward to seeing some things happening in that space in our city moving forward. So, and that would deal with, if you've got smaller houses, we need better parklands and better amenity for people to enjoy. Anyway, but I encourage everyone to support this one.
Thank you. So the motion is recommended for approval, subject to conditions of advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And 11.3.4 is a development application at 46A and 44 Caver Road, Rose Bay, recommending refusal. Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Seconder. Alderman James. Alderman Kennedy, would you like to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor, as per the officer's recommendation.
Okay. Alderman James.
Just look, it's an interesting situation in relation to this, and what the planners have done is referred to Section 5 and Schedule 1 of LUPA, and in that their comments are a direct take from Schedule 1, and I quote, "Because this particular development does not meet the objective to provide for the orderly and sustainable use of land." Now, what is interesting here is that if you read the report, you can go through and look at the general residential zone, which has been documented in detail, and it's referred to, amongst other things, that the wall and fence would not cause any major overshadowing, and also too there is no vacant adjoining properties. So when we look at acceptable solutions and then look at the performance criteria, as a rule we look at those particular planning matters and forget about what is the overarching particular issue, which is LUPA, and in what the officers have quoted as a particular section of LUPA and Schedule 1. And that is the basis on which they have made this recommendation to Council, because the fact of the matter is that this unapproved structure must be removed from the land within a certain time. But more importantly, what has happened is that this particular wall has been built on someone else's property, on land that belongs to them. And we're all very sure, and I think well aware of, a similar situation that occurred in the Hobart City Council most recently, where there was an objector to a wall or a sign being put on a wall or on a structure on his or her land, and that was the very basis of which I think the tribunal made its decision that in fact it was inappropriate and it wasn't in accordance with the conditions of Schedule 1 or with the terms of LUPA. I think this is a very interesting situation because it's been identified under LUPA in a particular schedule, and therefore the recommendation that has been put forward is that it does not satisfy that Section 5, and because it does not meet the objective of LUPA, and that is the fact that it has to provide for an orderly and sustainable use of the land. I seek council support.
Thank you, Alderman James. Other speakers?
Sure. Freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, equality of opportunity aren't really planning matters. Rule of law comes into it, and certainly property rights is totemic property rights matter. There is a boundary that's being encroached. I am not unsympathetic to the situation that is confronted by the applicants tonight. They didn't set out to end up in this situation, and they've tried to go about it in a matter-of-fact way, but there's a problem here, and that is encroachment onto other property. And so the officers have made not just the right call, but the call that is obliged to be made as well. So support the motion.
Yeah. Any other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Kennedy?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
So the motion before the chair is for refusal. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. That concludes our business as a planning authority. Moving on to governance. 11.7.1, there's a Huon Valley Council request to amend the stylus. If the recommendation is that we do not oppose that. Alderman Mulder?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I rise to move an alternative motion I think is discussed on the workshop on Friday, which was the officer's recommendation as stated, but in the absence of point 3, which is actually, which I'll speak to in a moment. So I move that the recommendation as listed, with the exception of point A3, be the motion.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Yes, thanks, Alderman Edmonds. Alderman Mulder?
Mayor, apologies for those, but maybe I should have circulated that, but it was discussed at Friday's workshop. The point is that we have before us, as per the current process that has been set up by the planning minister, an issue about the much maligned urban growth boundary that is having by necessity at the moment to be put through this ad hoc process. A process this council itself has followed, and a process that this council has actually supported. So I think the Huon Valley make a very good case, as did the Brighton one before, and as I think we will be able to do in due course with the ones. The reason for moving point 3 is that the last time this was discussed, it would raise some concern, but the issue with point 3 is that that particular point is not necessarily one that's agreed by all the councillors. And in the discussion on Friday, it was said, yes, but we're putting in that there because we're trying to expedite the review of the urban growth boundary. Well, if that's the case, then let's not, let's just say that we support this application, but that the boundary should be expedited as per the rest of that motion. At this point in time, I think it is, using your words, Mr Mayor, a little bit hypocritical for us to be saying we don't support ad hoc processes when we ourselves are involved in that particular process. So apart from that, I think that it's a very good motion and it ought to be supported.
Thank you. It was Luke, Alderman Edmonds, sorry. I've lost track of who seconded it for a moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Just to clarify, Mr Mayor, sorry to interrupt, Alderman James. So it is the motion before us excluding part 3.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Alderman James.
Yeah, look, I wasn't present on Friday. I had a number of other matters to attend to, unfortunately. And I can understand that the wording in the first sentence, and it's a huge sentence, ending with the word services, but to actually delete accordingly council requests urgent action by the state government on the review of the Southern Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy. We have been crying out for action on this, and my colleague Alderman von Berdo has consistently, and it'd be interesting if she joins this debate, and the fact that there has been, well, I'm not necessarily suggesting...
Now, please don't get distracted.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Please don't.
But the point
it is if we are going to remove that last sentence, then really we are not going to achieve anything in the way of driving home the point to the government that they need to review the strategy as soon as possible. I can understand the wording up to that word services, but I will not support this if we are going to delete that last sentence, which is imperative for this council keeping the heat on the government to do something about the 2011 strategy, and the very nature of deleting this would, in my opinion, be defeating the whole purpose of what this council has been trying to determine over the last few years.
James, suggesting amendments?
Look, I haven't heard that, so let's keep moving. Other speakers. Alderman von Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Alderman James. I won't be supporting, I wouldn't have supported the original recommendation, and I certainly won't be supporting this motion, or this altered recommendation. And the reason for that is, yes, I have been consistent throughout that I believe that we should not be considering ad hoc expansions of the urban growth boundary, whether they're in Clarence or whether they're within any other local government area. We need to actually have a review of the Southern Regional Land Use Strategy, which is well overdue. In fact, there should have been 2 reviews if it had gone to plan as it should have every 5 years for a review. So I will not be supporting this motion. Thank you.
You, Alderman von Berto. Other speakers. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Like Alderman James, I totally agree. I think that part of point 3, council request an urgent action by the state government to review the Southern Tasmania Regional Land Use Strategy. I think that's got to stay, and that's the message we're trying to get across. A bit like Alderman von Berto, I don't like us making decisions on other councils' area, but at the moment that's the way it's got to be done, so I'll be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Alderman Walker.
It troubles me somewhat, Your Worship, that I was a little bit simpatico with part of what Alderman James was saying. I'd already pencilled off an area there, or texted it off, to remind me what I was about to do, which was to request the mover of the motion to reinsert point 3, including every word after the word accordingly. To read point 3, Council requests urgent action by the state government on the review of the Southern Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy.
Mover.
That is acceptable to me, Mr Mayor.
Second it.
Very wise amendment.
Thank you. So now it's just a matter of the first sentence of 3 and the word accordingly being deleted.
I love this.
Something stopped.
I'll assume that the Commodore 64 will come up with a good soon. Look, I've got a couple of points to make. One of these is that my usual rant, part of this mess is the fault of the STCA, and people should not be, we should not forget or forgive the way that they handled this process. It led in many ways to their lobbying to the pig in a poke strategy of the day, which was a problem when it was implemented, let alone where we've got to now. Don't even get me started on what they did with all the money they wasted changing their name to Think South. There should be noted for the annals of time of what not to do in local government. Anyway, moving along, this is none of our business. And I'm voting in support of it because this local decision should be made, I guess, at the local level in the absence of the urgent action of the state government to review the land use strategy. So I appreciate the mover and the seconder accepting the amendment, and I encourage colleagues to accordingly support the motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Bromley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I couldn't miss this opportunity. As Alderman von Berto very eloquently touched on, Mr Mayor, and as we all know, this was put in place back in 2011 when the then Planning Minister, Labor Minister Brian Green, put this in place. It's been a decade. There's meant to have been 2 serious reviews since that time, and nothing has happened. So we can banter across the chamber here, we can add fantastic points to the motion, but the fact remains that the state government need to step up and take action here. This is absolutely ridiculous and absolutely so unprofessional of the planning department in this state. It's an absolute joke. This arbitrary line drawn a decade ago determines the urban growth, or indeed the growth and development of southern Tasmania that we know has seen astronomical growth, particularly here in Clarence, but obviously in all southern Tasmania. Of course, now we're dealing with the Huon Valley. They've been promising to do it for years. Talk's cheap. It's now time to see some action. So we need a coordinated approach here. I agree with Alderman Mulder. The ad hoc approach is ridiculous. But I also question what impact, if any, a motion from this council will have. There's been a decade of inactivity in this very important space. Now is the time for the Premier and the Planning Minister to step up and do what they're paid to do.
Thank you, Alderman Bromley. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I thank Alderman James for bringing that point forward. It was never my intention, as I said in my opening remarks, to suggest that we wouldn't be doing that. It was the first part, the fact that we have this council has approached it. The fact that it is none of our business, it is our business, because that is the way the planning scheme works, and that's the way that the Planning Minister has said, and that, like these things, there's lots of other things wrong with the urban growth boundary, and part of that review, and we've had this discussion, and I won't go into it now because it'll be adding new material, but I just flagged the point about the land banked within this urban growth boundary, and I mentioned that because that is what necessitates this ad hoc expansion. The fact that we have no measures to stop the land banking. So apart from that, I would commend the motion. I would encourage the Huon Council and all the other councils to seek our advice on the appropriateness of their plans.
So the motion before the Chair is as moved by Alderman Mulder with the amendment, so that 3 simply becomes the unhighlighted area that Council requests urgent action, etc. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 11.7.2 is proposing that Council amends the code for tenders and contracts to facilitate electronic lodgement.
I'll move that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Bonverdo. Do I have a second, Alderman Newington? Would you like to speak to it, Alderman Bonverdo?
I think it's self-explanatory, and it's really good to see the amended code. Thank you.
Alderman Newington.
Only that, yeah, I mean, moving up in technology and making it easy for people out there to do business and for the staff to do their job, I think is a great thing, and I look forward to the changes that occur as a result of that, and looking at the other changes to the policy moving forward.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Yes, look, I would like to seek a clarification on the Para 7 exemptions from tender or quotation processes. It states, and I won't read it in its entirety, but the Act states that in certain prescribed situations or prescribed contracts, the requirements to call tenders by way of open. Those situations which are set out in Regulation 27 are exemptions from the tender or quotation processes. So Part A says an emergency if, in the opinion of the General Manager, there is insufficient time to invite tenders for the goods or services required in that emergency. Through you, Mr Mayor, I would like clarification on that, and that is that is in the General Manager's opinion, what would constitute insufficient time to invite tenders that would in fact or signify an emergency situation. If he could sort of clarify that for me, because it just seems to be an open sort of delegation on his part to be able to determine if for some reason insufficient time was not prescribed to invite 10.
Before inviting the General Manager to comment on that, Alderman James,
Yes.
I will point out that this is not a change to the existing...
No.
Thanks.
I understand, but I just seek
General Manager,
clarification because we're going to endorse this.
Thank you, Alderman James. Yes, as the Mayor has said, the existing provisions reflect Regulation 27. They've been in place for quite a number of years. In the context of an emergency, they're rarely used, but an emergency could be any number of things. So, for example, the most recent use of that power was during the COVID lockdown, when I needed to spend an amount of money to set up people so they could work from home. And under that situation, given that a worldwide pandemic was clearly an emergency situation, we spent about $60,000 without going through the usual processes. So it needs to be significant, needs to be clear and obvious that it's an emergency, but it could be any number of things. It could be a bridge failure, it could be a major piece of infrastructure that's presenting a safety hazard to the community, it could be anything.
are there any other speakers?
Yes.
In that case, I'll put the motion, which is we amend the code. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to 11.7.3, the Council sets the rates and charges financial year 21-22 and extends the COVID financial hardship policy. I have a mover and a seconder, please.
Yes.
Alderman Ewington, seconded Alderman Chong. Thank you. Alderman Ewington.
No, I'll do it, Alderman Walker, and wait and see what everyone else says. But I think it's pretty straightforward, to be honest.
Alderman Chong.
Support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Alderman James, I could see you
Yes,
chomping at the bit.
But I was waiting for the mover, and even the second.
Please continue.
Okay, it's incredible. It's and I won't have a writing reply since I'm starting to give my reasons.
You could have moved it, Alderman.
No, no, there's no way I was going to move this.
Please continue.
Thanks very much. Okay. Yeah, look. I was a little bit disappointed with the process, although there has been improvement.
No, please don't interrupt.
There has been improvement in relation to having a full day session or most of the day set aside to discuss this. But the rate increase is 3.77. Now that is a huge hike on what I thought was, in our discussions in November 2020, there was and this was from our discussions, that there had been a revenue flow of a huge number of building applications, development applications, that filtered through during that COVID period, and it was sort of unsurpassed by any of us that at the time thought could actually happen. The fact of the matter is that there was that discussion in November last year that there was going to be a creation of 8 new positions, and that would have been cost neutral insofar as what the flow on from those DAs and building applications and so on had been concerned. And I was under the understanding that there was a number floated at the time between 3 and 3.5%. We started out on the first day, and I had to leave the meeting at 2 o'clock, when there was a discussion between the numbers of about 3.7 and 5, and therefore there was a lot of discussion about
would you please resume your seat for a moment? Point of order.
this is more like a summary of the budget process, not an addressing the actual motion that's in front of us here. Is that really relevant to go back over what's happened in the whole budget? Or should it just be focused on what's in front of us here?
I think
arguing for or against. It's just a grandstanding exercise in...
First of all, Alderman Ewington, I think it's improper to accuse it being a grandstanding exercise.
Well, it's not addressing the motion.
Alderman Ewington, I do believe that the process that we embarked upon to set the rates or land on a rates figure that's before us tonight to vote on is an appropriate course for Alderman James to take. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And so in the early stages it was set at very much at the 3.76%. What also was disappointing was that in prior year discussions on the rates we used to have, and I'm pretty sure we would have that during the course of the debate, the 10-year financial plan. And that was something that we could look at as part of the budget process to determine what the next 10 years and each year the 10-year financial plan is considered at budget time. And it didn't happen. And I thought that was really something that was extraordinary and therefore wasn't appropriate. Mr Mayor, look, I know my colleagues spent a lot of hours and we did a lot of horse trading in that sense in relation to some of these committee numbers, and I know that many made sacrifices in relation to what their committee's proposals were. But at the same time, you know, there is a lot of people out there in the community who will really feel the pinch in relation to the 3.77%. And even just looking at some of these numbers, I was told that in some instances those fluctuations can occur between 3.8 to 4.4, and these are on a standard building on a capital valuation within the city, and I think that really lends itself to the fact that these properties that have experienced, and I know we haven't gone through the proper valuation process yet, but the very nature of rates and what will be determined will give council, I believe, a greater inflow of rate revenue, and that would mean that there would be the detriment of a lot of the people in the city. So reluctantly I will not be supporting this rate increase. If it had been 3%, and that was sort of raised at the meeting last year when we were going through that process of discussing what the impact of rates would be in the 21-22 financial year, and I got a clear indication that was going to be the number. And if it had been between, say, 3, a bit over 3, but under 3.5, then I would have supported it, because I believe that was what we were flagged to discuss and the trade-off.
Thank you. I'm going to take the opportunity to hand the chair over to, I believe there's a couple of things that need to be clarified there. First of all, we have based the rates correctly on property valuations. It hasn't been as though we haven't used the appropriate discipline there. We certainly have. And secondly, as there are swings because of individual property valuations, certainly there are some up as high as 4%, but there are also some down at 2% as well. And I think that we need to make sure that's clear in the public record. Alderman Edmonds, I think, were you indicating that you'd like to speak?
I'm in the queue.
Sure,
no one's going to want to hop in front of me now.
You were just gazumped by Alderman James, that's all.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Thank you. This motion, just sitting there reflecting on what I might say, and I sort of thought it's sort of the good, the bad and the ugly. Start with the good, why not? After the sort of, in politics they talk about, how bad grey area is. Well, there's a lot of grey area. This is a big motion. But the last point, 10.1b, about extending the COVID financial hardship, I think is a really good measure. The pandemic is still here. It's only that we can travel back from Victoria tonight, I believe. there's no such thing as JobKeeper going forward for people. And people who might have got contracts during the pandemic might come under some hardship going forward. So I think it's very meritorious that we should at least, I mean, it's really the least we can do, that policy, and it's well put together and it's accessible to people, so I think that's good. Alderman James, I'll probably have to pick you up on something from you, just to correct the record, because you, as you say, you weren't in the room. The range that was discussed wasn't 3.7 to 5, it was a lower figure than 3.7, and I guess my reflections on this is that, I think I made the comment at the last meeting that I would have been happier to have worked harder to get that number down. We are where we are, and I'll go with the motion from the last meeting, and again tonight I'll support this motion because it's sort of the way it works with 12 of us around the table, I suppose. I do have a question, because obviously the fire levy is back and is in this in the motion in people's rates. The waste levy, when do we expect that to turn up on a bill? Is it later this year?
General Manager.
Thank you. My understanding is that the state government had originally anticipated November, but we haven't had that confirmed. And certainly from a local government point of view, we were pressing for the 1st of July next year.
Yeah, because talk about the good, the bad. This is the ugly for me. We fight tooth and nail over the percentage, and even if some people were comfortable with the sort of 5% range, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily comfortable with big slugs to people's cost of living through our rates notice. And I guess just with the waste levy, it's a real concern of mine that this is a cost that is going to turn up on people's rates notice, collected by us, channeled through to the state government, and you have literally no way to avoid it. It's a tax on your wheelie bin in front of your house. So we can sort of talk about 3.7, low 3s, or the early 5s, but then you whack the dollar figure that is to be determined for the waste levy on the people's rates, and the scrap for whether it's 3.7 to 3.67, whatever, is kind of a little bit goes out the window, which I think is disappointing. So that's the ugly for me. I just really think that it's a bit of a Trojan horse, this waste levy. It's coming either in November or next year, and it's going to be a massive hit to people's cost of living, and there's no real way to avoid it. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers? In that case, Alderman Blomley and then Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, this was a thorough process, as I said, the Special Council meeting, a process that involved all of us. Most of us were there for every single budget workshop and session. It's something that we all put a lot of time in and effort towards, a lot of thought. None of us want to increase rates. We're all ratepayers. None of us want to increase rates from a purely selfish perspective, but also from a politically populist position as well. No one wants to be known as the person who increases rates. But there's a couple of facts here, Mr Mayor, that I think need to be put on the table, and some that you touched on earlier. We have seen the best growth in this city in the last 60 years occur in recent times. That's a fact. We've outpaced the growth in other greater Hobart councils. We've trounced them. People want to live here, and we know why. In the year to March this year, Clarence had development applications numbering 1,056. Hobart, 925. Kingborough, 815, and Glenorchy, 530. So with all that development going on, all that time and effort from our staff, and all the other associated people that make that all possible, we are in a fortunate position to have had good, sound economic management over the preceding years. We're in a good position, we're in a great position. That's why we came out of, it was a tough year last year, the COVID pandemic, in a better than expected position, as we all know. There's been sound financial principles that have been long governing this council, And for that, I acknowledge the General Manager and the CFO and their teams, because they've done a very good job. They're prudent, they're responsible, and they're frugal. Very frugal. As we know, last year there was no rate increase. There is this year a rate increase being proposed at 3.77%. So if we put that over 2 years, it's actually an annual increase of 1.89%. Less than 2%, if you look at it that way. But on top of those sound financial principles and the growth that we've experienced, we're also seeing a record, the second largest ever capital spend in this city of some $21.4 million. We're actually getting out in front of everyone else and building what needs to be built. We're out there ensuring that service levels are at the level that our residents and ratepayers expect. And as a comparison, being the second largest municipality in this state, I look to the largest municipality being Launceston, and they have, as I'm informed, an underlying deficit this financial year expected to be $3.544 million. So I know where I'd rather be. I'd rather be here, where there's good economic and sound management. But the main reason why the rate increase is where it's at, putting to one side the record capital expenditure, is the service levels. With growth comes an increased demand on our services. And I've got to say, I'm not going to start quoting people's or colleagues' contributions in workshops, Mr Mayor, but we're all determined to ensure that our residents and ratepayers get the best service delivery possible. We'd all agree with that. But you know what? That comes at a cost. It comes at a cost, and that cost has been reflected here this evening. So, Mr Mayor, this has been a thorough and professional process, and I firmly believe, rather than seeking to play or take a populist line, wouldn't it be great if we could stand together as professionals, step up as a city and say, this is what we're doing and this is the cost of service delivery, and we will continue to work in your best interests.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I don't think we have any basis for patting ourselves on the back in relation to the rates increase that we're proposing. Percentages increases on their own are meaningless. They're spin. What we need to know is how are we doing compared to our neighbours. Morgan Spring Bay was hit the news this week with a proposed 15% rate rise and another 15%, and everyone was saying, oh, that's terrible, it's awful, shocking, you know, they've maxed out their debt, they're in terrible state at their 15%. Until the Mayor of Morgan Spring Bay points out that due to poor things, that after the 15%, they will still be lower for average residential properties than they are in neighbouring councils to on break a day. So, you know, shock horror 15%, and all they're doing is playing catch up. The government division the local government division of the state government produced a report in 2017 that showed Clarence rates were 12% above the average of the comparable cities of Glenorchy and Kingborough. Comparisons with Hobart and Launceston, indeed Devonport and Burnie, aren't really valid. These cities have substantial standalone access to commercial rates, and the government division made that point very strongly. We are, Clarence, Kingborough and Glenorchy are comparable cities because we are satellite cities with the main commercial rate take being in the centre of Hobart. Hobart and Launceston are not comparable cities. Glamorgan Spring Bay has, the 2.5, I mentioned that. So surely it can't be hard to compare our rates on an average residential property, because this is the thing that really concerns our ratepayers, of an average of a $415,000 house, which is what we have been told is the average price of a house. That would then, if we had that for the cities of Glenorchy and Kingborough, however drive, whether whatever method used, we would then be in a position to know whether we were doing okay or not. Or are we still 12% out ahead of comparable cities, in which case we might need to have a look at what we are doing and whether we are providing the services that we need to be doing. But getting back to the other issue that I mentioned earlier on today, there's the issue about the urban growth boundary and land banking. And as I've indicated at the workshop on Saturday, is there any capacity to levy a rate on higher rates on undeveloped land that is within the urban growth boundary?
Is that a rhetorical question?
No, Mr Mayor, it was a question I flagged, and that the General Manager said he would get a formal response.
General Manager.
Thank you. I'm not aware, Alderman Mulder, of any particular head of power to do that at the moment. It's certainly a conversation we've been having with the state government across the local government sector as a means to address the issue of land banking. And I understand the government has also been considering other options as well, but where that's at I can't tell you at this point.
What a order, Mr Mayor. I wasn't aware of a workshop on Saturday. Is there something I was invited to?
I think it was the agenda brief on Friday.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, just by way of explanation, I wouldn't have only missed one meeting, not two.
Beg your pardon?
Look, I'm not sure
No,
where we're going here, but
That was the point of explanation.
if we can leave that there, I'm a bit confused, I must admit. But,
I'm not the only one that's confused.
any other comments?
Sure.
Alderman Walker.
So this marks budget number 10 for me, and I won't leave you in suspense, but the answer is I'm not supporting number 10, even though I've supported the previous 9. And I'll just talk through a few things. I have a real problem with a budgeting approach, which is numbering of people sitting around a table going, oh, 2.1, 3.7, I don't know, 4, like just visceral numbers. That is no way to come up and do a budget process that is best practice. And I feel a little churlish, given I did get the support of everyone around this table to move to performance budgeting last time. But I think performance budgeting is crucial, and we can move forward through a process that is got some more rigour, and in fact in some ways incorporates a little bit of what Alderman Mulder was saying, Mr Mayor. Some comparisons. Now, it is actually proper and appropriate to do comparisons with cities like Launceston and Hobart. They have residential rates. Knowing what they are is good, but also knowing and drilling down the financials, because if a member of the public was to pull out the newspaper and see that Hobart is raising their rates by less than us, you'd think, gee whiz, what's going on? You guys lift up your fingers. Well, Hobart, the theme to their budget was the lesser known song by Neil Diamond called Red Red Ink. There's plenty of it, and it goes on for a very long time.
Red Red Wine.
He's quick.
Please don't interrupt, Alderman Jones.
Of course you know that one.
Yeah.
Order. Can we keep the floor with Alderman Walker, please?
Yes. So, there's a lot of different things to go through. When you're trying to do, I guess the heuristic I have when it comes to budgeting is your value proposition. And we're laboratories of democracy now. There are some councils, if you like, that take a Tiger Air approach as far as, doing the least amount of services, the least amount of cost with the amenity that's associated with it. There are some legacy carriers as well that take a more modest approach, if you like, as far as cost containment, service delivery, etc. I'm always trying to struggle with what is a value proposition. If you do it that way, you're staying nimble, and you may decide that, actually 5% is right because of these are the extra value propositions that come with it. Or again, look, we can cut things back here or there and bring it down to a lower number. That is the heuristic. We should be doing it, not on a percentage number thing that feels okay and we'll back solve from there to get the result. I was hoping that there'd be a greater focus around OPEX, because the OPEX stuff is worrying me, and you have to scrutinise every single new position, because you'll pretty much find that each of those positions are forever ever. That $80,000, $90,000, $100,000, $150,000 your population might grow and you might need that, but just if it's a new thing, you've got to be sure that you're happy to base that and bake that into your costs, because they'll tend to be a forever cost, not just a one-off. And that's the different with CapEx, and that is the level of grandstanding that is good, because we are building many different infrastructures, including those. But this could have been, this is coming out of COVID, this could have been, I think, more of a year of reforming, and we could have taken more to that, and I don't think we got there. I really don't. And if you were to wind back the tape on, budget 3 or 4 years ago, 5, 6, you'll see me shaking my fist saying we need to do better, but I'm going to support it. Actually, last year's budget is something I think we should be proud of. Now, if you reflect back to the start of that, we could have gone in very different ways. There was ideas that there was one approach, which was to add 1% on top of the rates for the next 4 or 5 years, and we pushed back and found a different way. There was a variety of different approaches that would have left us, I think, in a far less sound position. And I'm proud that none of us got what we want, but we all ended up, I think, last year in really trying circumstances with a pretty good outcome. So I'm hoping that performance budgeting will change the way that we approach budgets, and taking that value proposition, the number will come from it, but I suspect it will, as I said, be a better value proposition for each of our ratepayers. So not this time.
Thank you. Other speakers? Or I reply, Alderman Newington.
Well, only quickly, just to summarise, I suppose, look, there's some issues that have been raised, which some of them valid, some of them I agree with, some of them I don't. I mean, the one thing I do, think that is, and I've said this before in the chamber, is in relation to the actual increase here. I don't really think picking a number and trying to work to a number is the way to go. It's looking at exactly what the services are that we should be providing and asking the community what they expect us to deliver. And I think looking at the essential services versus some of the more discretionary things that are in our programs at the moment, I think I've made that quite clear. I think there's some of those things I don't necessarily agree with, but at the end of the day, any mechanism that we come up with that allows us to have that debate with the community and ask them what they expect of us would certainly be valid. And if Alderman Walker's performance budgeting process helps us get down that path, I welcome that happening. But at the end of the day, this motion before us is all about giving us the legal mechanism to allow us to set the rates, and I think it's, we can agree with it or disagree with it moving forward, but at the end of the day, we've got to give the staff and us as a council a way of moving forward. And the time for dealing with the things we agree with or don't disagree with is past, and it's time that we spend the next few months looking at ways of doing it better, and hopefully we can do that. But I think ultimately we'll come up with a reasonably good approach to it, and I think, and then, like I said, at the end of the day, we've got to approve this one and get on with the next step, which is issuing the notices and keeping things ticking over. So,
thank you. Thanks, Alderman Newington. So the motion is that Council sets the rates and charges for the coming financial year and extends the COVID financial hardship policy. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to item 12, Alderman's question time. There are no matters on notice. Answers to questions asked at the last council meeting, we'll take those as read. So moving on to questions without notice, I think starting with Alderman Warren.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Alderman James.
Yes, look, thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, I thank the officers for their response with regard to the public hear in Belrive, and I'm pleased that the council has assessed the matter. My question first question is in relation to the pier, and it's almost ready to be opened, it seemed to me, and I go for my jog, my fast walk along the Esplanade from time to time. It was only last
Can
Friday.
we get to the question, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr Mayor. So my question in relation to the pier, and through you too, Mr Graham. Mr Graham, are you in a position to advise council when the pier will be open to the public, and can you advise the council of a monetary value that it's cost in relation to the pier and its construction?
Mr Graham.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'm not in a position at the moment to advise on a date of opening, but I will do as soon as we find out. Pending outcome in the closed meeting will allow us to proceed with some underwater grouting work, which is recommended by the structural engineers to complete the construction, and then we'll be in a readiness to enter practical completion and hand over to council for it to be open to the public. In terms of the second question, I believe the closed meeting report has sort of the monetary value indications in there.
Thank you.
And my second question is in relation to 28 Aqua Place, 7 Mile Beach. My question through you to Mr Lovell, his capacity as manager. Mr Lovell, 28 Aqua Place, there were 4 representations against that proposal. It was approved under delegation by council officers. Mr Lovell, are you able to advise council in the last financial year how many of these particular applications, where there's been at least 2 or more representatives, have in fact council's officers have exercised their delegation to approve the development application?
Mr Mayor, no, I can't answer that. It's a matter that we can research and provide feedback on.
Thank you. You're going to take it on notice, Alderman Bomberto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got 2 questions. The first one is, what is the current status of the council resolutions of the 10th of August 20 and the 9th of February 21, respectively, that the General Manager write to the Minister for Planning advising that Council supports an amendment to the Southern Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy that expands the urban growth boundary to include the properties at 471 Cambridge Road, Mornington, and 540 Pass Road, Cambridge, and also 52 Richardson's Road, Sanford. It's a huge long question.
Through you, Mr Mayor, in relation to the Mornington site, you wrote to the Minister approximately a week after the council meeting advising of the decision. There has been nothing received back from the Minister's office or a relevant government department since then. There have been communications at officer level though, and at this I can say the officers in relevant departments say at this point there's no further action on the decision.
Okay.
In relation to the site of 52 Richardson Road, as council may be aware, the Minister wrote asking for further information that responded to the information sheet, RLUS1, and the council in turn asked the applicant to provide that documentation for the council's consideration. That's happened. We've forwarded that request on. We're currently waiting for a response, and when we receive that, we'll be able to report back to council.
Thank you. Got a second question?
My second question is, when is it anticipated that the 2 public toilets and the skate park berm stroke fence at South Arm will be completed?
Mr Graham?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the toilet next to Calvin Hall is anticipated to be open in July. The toilet in Jetty Road is anticipated to be open in August, and we have no firm date on Burn. We're still completing design and get quotation documents out for pricing. When we have received prices and have a contractor's timing available, I'll then inform council.
Alderman Evans.
Thank you. Back on a topic from earlier tonight about the waste levy. Does the council have any modelling on the cost per household of the waste levy?
Mr Graham, or General Manager?
Through Mr Mayor, early analysis indicates that the waste levy, in terms of applying to what might be regarded on ratepayers from council, would be $8 to $10 per property. That being saying,
per year, I take.
Per year, yes. That's early estimates at this stage, based on $20 a tonne. That being saying, if the persons were to go to Mornington Park themselves, they will be charged effectively a waste levy for their own waste that they take across the weighbridge themselves. But further information will be provided to Aldermen when we get information from state government.
Thank you. General Manager, you've got further to add?
Yes, I have a bit of additional information to add. It needs to be remembered that the waste levy is designed around tonnes received through the gate. So it's designed to encourage people to reduce the waste that they send to landfill. If those number of tonnes per year do decrease, then that has a material impact on what we would levy from year to year as well. So at this point in time, we're running on the current tonnes per year based on a $20 per tonne levy.
Yeah, but that's a citywide measure,
Yes,
not the big
that's right. And then when you divide it up per property, it comes down to around $8 to $10.
And just to follow up, is that modelling or dollar figures? It's a sliding sort of. It's been grandfathered in. Is that correct?
Mr. Graham may add some extra. It's anticipated that it's going to year on year go from $20 to $40 to $60. Those increments might not be quite correct, but essentially over a period of years, it's designed to get to $60 a tonne.
Thank you.
Alderman Blom.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I refer to the new bike track that I know is being developed outside the Clarendon Vale Primary School through the generous support of Clarence, Sunrise, Rotary, Variety Tasmania and others. I'm just keen to understand when that will be operational and able to be used.
Mr. Graham.
Through Mr. Mayor, I'm not up to date on that project, so I'll advise Alderman as soon as I
So take that on notice.
Thank you.
Thank you. And perhaps a note in the weekly briefing report, Mr. Graham. Thank you. Alderman Pearce.
Mayor, look, the question is, can we just have a look at this? And this is after 6 p.m, I must say, but certain days we've got a very busy restaurant opposite council, and there's a couple of days there where you just can't get through. The whole road's blocked because people are turning into this takeaway restaurant, and it's just happening more and more now. And I'm just wondering, and because it's after 6 o'clock, there's no staff here, is there some way we can just have a look at that traffic? I mean, it's not the restaurant's fault. I'm pleased it's really busy, but it really is. It's blocking the traffic. You just can't get through.
Mr. Graham, perhaps a safety order for the traffic.
our officers are presently undertaking that at the moment.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Walker. Alderman Newington.
No, just one update. Quite a few months ago, I
Order, please.
had an enormous request about. It's a question for Ross Ryan. That's it. In relation to the no parking up Shoreline Drive as you turn into the Shoreline Shopping Centre. I know that a couple of messages came out about that had gone out consultation, but it's like a good 6 months later and I haven't seen anything happen. Just wondered what was happening with that.
Mr. Graham.
Through Mr. Mayor, I believe that one's been resolved. I'll inform Alderman of the outcome of that. We certainly undertook some consultation, and I think from memory we've put up a no standing sign at a certain time, but
There's nothing there yet.
it might be works order bin, but I'll inform Alderman of the outcome of that project.
Another note for the weekly briefing report, Mr. Graham. Thank you. Alderman Kinder.
No, thank you.
Alderman Moran.
Now, I refer to the proposal that we received recently to convert some of the short stay rooms, tourist accommodation in the Newton Kangaroo Bay development into permanently privately owned permanent accommodation. Mr. Mayor, does the current design and footprints of the buildings in that development provide for adequate private open space as required by our planning scheme? That is,
General Manager,
I'm pretty comfortable, so I'll need to take that one on notice.
that's a good answer. Yeah, I was struggling for words.
I think it's fairly simple, Mr. Mayor, is that it doesn't have balance.
It's somewhat academic at this point. We do have to actually consider the proposals put forward by Shamboard. We haven't had a chance to do that yet. I expect we'll be doing that early July.
By way of explanation, I asked in the context of the fact that the proposals before us is to use the existing footprint and the existing architectural design of those buildings. So if That's the proposal. And I look forward to the answer to that question.
And the question is highly relevant to how we go about considering the options. Thank you. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is in relation to Cambridge. So originally when the bypass was being built, the intention was that the roads between Jane Lane and the highway would be handed back to council, and we have a master plan for that area. My question is, what's the status of that, and where are we in discussions about handing the roads back?
Through Mr. Mayor, last year State Government wrote to us inquiring about the process for that. We've provided an audit on that road back to State Government, and we haven't heard back since. So I will follow up with State Government and inform Alderman.
Thanks, Mr. Graham. That brings us to the conclusion of the open session of council. So I'd like to thank the members of the audience who've watched us online, but we do need to close the open meeting at this stage. Thank you.